Death in ancient Egypt was not a private event. It was a public act of cosmic significance. When the pharaoh's mummy was finally ready, it was placed within a sequence of increasingly elaborate coffins. An innermost coffin of gilded wood or solid gold, then one or two outer coffins, then perhaps a stone sarcophagus. All of this nested like a set of sacred shells, each one inscribed with spells, painted with protective deities, designed to be a universe unto itself, a microcosm of the cosmos surrounding and protecting the divine body within. The journey to the tomb began at the embalming house and wound westward, always westward, toward the setting sun, toward the land of the dead, toward the necropolis carved into the limestone cliffs of the West Bank. In Egyptian geography, east was the realm of the living, where the sun rose, where crops grew, where cities hummed. West was the realm of the dead, where the sun set, where it descended into the underworld, where it would journey through the night and be reborn at dawn. The procession itself was a staggering spectacle. At the front, white-robed priests walked ahead, swinging censers of smoking incense, kyphi, the sacred blend of 16 ingredients including raisins, wine, honey, myrrh, and various resins, whose exact recipe was inscribed on temple walls as a holy text. The smoke purified the path, drove away malevolent forces, and opened a corridor of sacred space through the ordinary world. Behind the priest came the grave goods, the furniture the pharaoh would need in the next life: gilded beds and chairs, alabaster vessels of oil and perfume, chests overflowing with fine linen, weapons, jewelry, board games, statues of servants called ushabtis, small figurines made of faience, stone, or wood, inscribed with a spell from the Book of the Dead that would animate them to perform any labor demanded of the deceased in the afterlife. Some royal burials contained over 400 ushabtis, one for every day of the year, plus overseers to manage them. The canopic chest, carrying the jars holding the pharaoh's organs, traveled in its own special shrine, pulled on its own sledge, attended by its own priests. Then came the mummy itself, the focal point of everything, enthroned in its gilded coffin within a wooden shrine, mounted on a sledge draped in blue and gold cloth, drawn by teams of oxen whose hooves stirred up the pale desert dust. Alongside and behind the coffin walked the mourners. Professional mourning was a highly skilled art in ancient Egypt, and the women who performed it were not simply crying. They were enacting a sacred drama. They wailed in complex patterns, threw handfuls of dust over their heads and into the air, tore at their clothes, beat their chests. Two of their number were specially designated to play the roles of Isis and Nephthys, the great goddesses who had mourned the slain god Osiris, who had gathered his scattered body parts and restored him to life. By playing these roles in the procession, the mourning women collapsed the distance between myth and reality, between the first death in sacred history and this death today. The pharaoh was Osiris now. The procession was the story of Osiris, replayed in the physical world. And the man at the center of it all, walking alongside the coffin in his distinguishing leopard skin robe, was the Sem priest. In a royal funeral, this role was almost always performed by the pharaoh's own son and heir. This was not merely symbolic. By leading his father's funeral rites, by acting as Horus, the divine son, restoring his father Osiris, the new king was simultaneously performing a theological act and a political one. He was publicly establishing himself as the legitimate heir, stepping into the role that divine law required of him. Every eye in the procession, every noble, every priest, every soldier who witnessed it, saw the living Horus conducting the rites for his father Osiris. The transition of power was not just announced, it was consecrated. The procession crossed the Nile by boat, a passage that itself carried enormous symbolism, mirroring the solar bark of Ra crossing the sky, mirroring the journey of the dead through the waters of the underworld. Then it climbed toward the tomb entrance, cut into the rock face or built above ground in the pyramid complexes of earlier dynasties. When the procession reached the tomb's entrance, it stopped. The coffin was lifted from the sledge and stood upright. A priest wearing the mask of Anubis stepped forward to receive it, holding the coffin steady, the jackal head gleaming in the torchlight. The family gathered close. The priests arranged themselves. This was the edge of the known world. On one side, life, sunlight, the Nile, the living. On the other side, the eternal dark, the underworld, the gods, forever. The most important thing that had ever been done for this pharaoh was about to begin. Let's be precise about what was about to happen, because the Egyptians were extraordinarily precise about it themselves. The opening of the mouth was not a single gesture. It was an elaborate, multi-act sacred drama. Scholars who have analyzed the complete version of the ceremony, reconstructed primarily from the tomb of Rekhmir and from New Kingdom royal tombs, have counted as many as 75 distinct episodes. It was a performance that could take many hours. Every gesture was prescribed. Every word was fixed. Every tool had a theological meaning. This was not improvised prayer. It was a sacred score, and it had to be played exactly right. The ceremony opened, as almost everything in Egyptian ritual life did, with purification. Holy water from sacred pools, water associated with the primordial creation waters of Nun, was sprinkled on the mummy and around the ritual space. Incense was burned in abundance. The Sem priest ritually purified himself, donning his leopard skin robe and reciting preparatory invocations. All of this was necessary to create the correct sacred environment, a space between the ordinary world and the divine one, where magical acts could take effect. Then the Sem priest approached with the sacred instruments. These were not ordinary tools. Each one was a carefully chosen object, charged with layers of theological meaning, some of them ancient beyond reckoning. The most famous instrument was the procession. It was a blade with a distinctive split, forked end, shaped something like a fishtail, and it was one of the oldest instruments in the entire Egyptian ritual toolkit, appearing in contexts that predate the pharaonic period. Scholars believe it evolved directly from the flint knives used by midwives to cut a newborn's umbilical cord. Think about what that means. The same tool that severed the cord connecting a baby to the womb, that initiated a new life, was now being used to sever the bonds that kept the soul sealed inside the body. The opening of the mouth was a birth, a rebirth precisely. The procession performed the same function it always had. It cut the cord between one state of being and the next. The adze was another central tool, a woodworking instrument with a curved blade, normally used to smooth and shape timber. In the ceremony, it was used symbolically to carve open the senses, to cut away the seals that death had placed on the mouth, the eyes, the nose, the ears. In the most sacred and prestigious versions of the ceremony, those performed for royalty, the adze might be made from iron of the most extraordinary kind, iron extracted from meteorites. The Egyptians called it breathtaking, iron of the sky, metal that had fallen from the heavens. Metal in an age before smelting that was literally supernatural in origin, an adze made from a falling star. If any material in the world carried the power to open the senses of the dead, surely it was that. Other instruments included a serpent-headed blade, two small finger-shaped tools called the sitep, and the foreleg of a freshly sacrificed calf. Still warm, still vital, its life force not yet departed. This last element was not symbolic in the ordinary sense. In Egyptian thought, vitality was a transferable substance. The act of touching the mummy with the still warm foreleg of a living animal was a direct attempt to transfer the calf's vital energy into the body of the deceased, life flowing from the living into the dead. With these tools assembled, the Sem priest began the central act. He approached the standing mummy and with slow, deliberate precision, touched each instrument to the mummy's face, to the mouth, the eyes, the nose, the ears, in a sequence prescribed by the ritual texts. At each touch, a second priest, reading from a papyrus scroll, recited the accompanying spell. These spells were among the most powerful words in the Egyptian liturgical canon, drawn from the oldest layers of the funerary tradition. One text declares, "My mouth is opened by Ptah, and what was on my mouth has been loosened by my local god. Thoth comes, fully equipped with magic, and the bonds of Set which restricted my mouth have been loosened." Ptah, the great craftsman god of Memphis, the God of creation through the spoken word, who had brought the universe into existence simply by naming it, was the appropriate divine patron for this act. If anyone could unlock a sealed mouth, it was the God whose very nature was the creative power of speech. And Set, the god of chaos, of the desert, of violent disorder, was invoked as the force responsible for the sealing. Death in this framework was an act of violence committed by chaos against order. The opening of the mouth was the reversal of that violence, the restoration of order, the victory of Ma'at over chaos. Another spell from the Book of the Dead: I open for you your mouth, I open for you your two eyes. I open for you your mouth with the adze of Upuaut. With the iron adze with which the mouths of the gods were opened, I open your mouth. With which the mouths of the gods were opened. That line is everything. The opening of the mouth was not being performed on the deceased as a human being. It was being performed on the deceased as a god. The mummy lying in that coffin was Osiris now, and the Sem priest acting as Horus was restoring his father, using the same divine rites that had restored the gods themselves in the beginning of time. The ceremony reached back to creation, repeated the primal act of divine enlivening, and brought it forward into the present moment. Each touch of each tool, each spoken spell, was understood to break open one more seal: the mouth. Now it could receive offerings. Now it could speak. Now it could utter the sacred passwords required to pass through the gates of the underworld. Now it could argue its own case in the judgment of the heart. The eyes now, they could see the path ahead, could recognize the gods, could witness the beauty of the field of reeds. The nose, now it could breathe the sacred breath of life, the divine air. The ears, now it could hear the words of Thoth, the divine scribe, who would guide the deceased through the complex geography of the afterlife. Sense by sense, door by door, the seals were broken, and when the ceremony's final episodes were completed, when the last spell had been read and the last gesture made, something had fundamentally changed in the theology of the moment. The thing standing in that coffin was no longer a mummy. It was an activated being, a vessel prepared and opened. The Ka and Ba could return. The Ak could begin to form. The deceased could speak and see and breathe and receive offerings. To prove it, the ceremony ended with a meal. Offerings were presented before the mummy: bread, beer, beef, fowl, wine, milk, fruit, linen, alabaster, gold. A vast and lavish feast. With the mouth now opened, the deceased could partake. The Ka could receive sustenance. The bond between the living and the dead, between the world of offerings and the world of the spirit, was restored. And then the living who had gathered, priests, family, attendants, sat down and shared a meal themselves. A communion. The last shared table between those who remained in the world of the living and the one who was crossing into another. And then the mummy was carried inside the tomb. The coffin was placed in its stone sarcophagus. The grave goods were arranged around it. The canopic chest was set in its designated place. The priests backed out of the chamber, sweeping their footprints from the floor as they went, erasing every trace of the living from the realm of the dead. And the tomb was sealed. The stone door slid closed. The plaster was applied over it. The official seal of the necropolis, a jackal over 9 bound captives, was pressed into the wet plaster. And outside, for the first time in 70 days, there was silence. What we've just witnessed is so much more than a ritual. It is a window, perhaps the clearest window we have, into what the ancient Egyptians truly believed about the nature of reality. For 3,000 years, across kingdom after kingdom, dynasty after dynasty, this ceremony was performed. It was performed for pharaohs in pyramids and in rock-cut tombs in the Valley of the Kings. It was performed for nobles and priests and officials in their own smaller tombs. Simplified versions were performed for ordinary Egyptians who could afford even a basic funerary preparation. The theology scaled. The materials might be gold or painted wood. The setting might be a great pyramid or a simple pit in the desert, but the core belief was the same. Death is not the end. It is a transition, a dangerous, complex transition that requires precise preparation, correct knowledge, and the right ritual acts to navigate safely. But it can be navigated. Eternity is available. You just have to know how to get there. What strikes me most, looking at all of this, is not the strangeness of it. It's the recognition. The Egyptians looked at the fact of death, this total, terrifying rupture in the fabric of a person's existence, and they refused to accept it as the final word. They brought to bear every tool available to them, their science of preservation, their art, their architecture, their theology, their mathematics, their writing. They created one of the most elaborate and sophisticated systems for confronting mortality that any civilization has ever produced. And at the center of it all was a ceremony in which a son stood before his father's body and spoke words that had been spoken since before memory, and touched ancient tools to sealed lips and commanded the dead to wake. The ceremony was also performed on statues of the gods, cold carved stone transformed into divine homes by the power of the rite. And this tells us something profound. For the Egyptians, the boundary between representation and reality, between image and being, was not fixed. The right ritual act could collapse that boundary. A statue could become a god. A mummy could become a soul. Words could become reality. This wasn't superstition. For them, it was applied metaphysics. It was how the universe actually worked. And there's a question worth sitting with. Did the Egyptians invest this extraordinary weight of ingenuity and faith into the problem of death because they were consumed by fear of oblivion? Because the alternative, that death simply ends everything, was too terrible to accept? That would be one way to read it. A civilization so haunted by the void that they built pyramids to escape it. Or, and I think this reading is closer to the truth, does this ceremony stand as something else entirely? A monument to something almost unprecedented in human history, the absolute unshakable confidence that the universe is fundamentally on the side of life. That existence has a direction, and that direction is toward more being, not less. That death is not an ending, but a beginning that requires preparation. That the gods themselves have died and been reborn. And therefore, death is not defeat. It is the pattern of all existence. The opening of the mouth says, "You are not done. You are not over. You are being born again into something greater." And we are here with our tools and our words and our love to open the way. 4,500 years later, those words still have the power to move something in us, because the question they're answering hasn't changed. Thank you for making it to the end of this journey. If this kind of deep, immersive exploration of the ancient world is what you come here for, the best thing you can do is subscribe and hit the bell. It means you'll never miss one of these dives, and it genuinely helps us keep making them at this level of depth. If today's video resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What aspect of the ceremony surprised you most? What questions do you still have? This community is one of the most thoughtful on the platform, and the conversations in the comments are always worth reading. For further exploration, we have deep dives into the Book of the Dead, the construction of the Valley of the Kings, the religious revolution of Akhenaten, and the mythology of Osiris and Horus, all of which illuminate different corners of the world we've just visited together. And if you want to support this channel directly and go even deeper, behind-the-scenes production notes, early access, extended cuts, and member-only discussions, our Patreon is linked below. Until next time, keep asking the hard questions. The ancients certainly did.